polls, or most of the polls, predicted a lower margin between Macron and Le Pen. But very clearly, it's less than what he did 5 years ago. 5 years ago, it was like a 2/3, 1/3 difference between him and Le Pen. Still, it's a very strong victory for him. And yet, let's not forget two things. First of all, many voters who voted for the far left in the first round simply abstained from voting in the second round. And therefore, Macron could have had a better result, but a lot of the far left loathes both Macron and Le Pen. Don't forget that the economic platform of Marine Le Pen is much more to the left. Macron is a former banker. His economic policy was conservative. His finance minister in the past 5 years was a right-winger from the Republican Party. So he's very much hated by the left. And Le Pen's economic platform is to the left of Macron. That's something we have to understand. Second thing is that, as Owen's report just mentioned, you have legislative elections in about a month, and a French president with or without a majority is completely different. A French president with a majority in parliament is very powerful. A French president without a majority is not, and will have to appoint a prime minister that does not agree with him. So the result, the outcome of the upcoming votes for parliament will be a very critical step for Macron, whether or not he will have the power in parliament to implement his policy and to govern.
In 2022, to see a far-right party doing as well as it did, Owen, your take?
Surprise, at least a mild surprise. Obviously, the presence of the far right on the European political scene, and for that matter, the global political scene, it's not a new story. This is a story that's 6 years old or so, going back to the Brexit vote, the rise of Donald Trump. So it's not a new story. Marine Le Pen, of course, not a new face in French politics, to say the least. She and her father have been there for decades, and she has made it to the runoff, made it in 2017. Her father made it into the runoff against Jacques Chirac. So it's on one hand not a new story. On the other hand, it is at least mildly surprising. Nita, there was a sense, I don't know if Emmanuel agrees with this, that the populist wave in Europe had to some degree crested. Right? There had been a wave that had risen with the rise of people like Matteo Salvini in Italy. And in that particular case, as one example, the wave had crested a bit. And populism was on a kind of slow decline, or at least had been contained. And now you have a result like this one, where on the one hand, as I said in the piece, Macron won. He won a decisive victory. And he is going to be the one who's in the Élysée Palace. He is going to be the president, and he is going to be the one to move forward with his policies ultimately. But on the other hand, again, you have Marine Le Pen taking more than 40% of the vote. And again, Benita, look at those overseas territories. Guadeloupe, we heard that woman in the piece. 70% of the vote for Marine Le Pen in Guadeloupe, right? These are not white working class voters in northern France. These are blacks living in Guadeloupe. And that's not the only place. Mayotte, Muslim Mayotte, that island in the Indian Ocean. 60% of the vote for Marine Le Pen by African Muslims. It's really, really astounding the way she was able to tap into this anxiety, to this anger, and to be able to find these voters and connect with them in ways I don't think we would have expected in the past. Obviously, the numbers in these places are not large, but I think it's illustrative of the ability of the far right to become more sophisticated and to be able to reach new constituencies, making it ultimately more powerful. And that, too, I think is a bit of a yellow card to the French establishment and to the European establishment.
There were many leaders across Europe smiling this morning. Another leader who was happy was President Joe Biden. Let's take a listen to the comments he made on this day.
I feel good about the French election, number one. Number two, I tried to talk to him last night. We spoke with the staff, but he was at the Eiffel Tower having a good time. So I'm going to be talking to him today.
Dr. Navon, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think also I'd like to also comment to what Owen said. Maybe describing Le Pen as far right is not entirely accurate. I mean, I mentioned before her left-wing economics, right? But for all these voters in French overseas territories, obviously they don't consider themselves far right. They just identify with the message of Le Pen of being against the establishment, of talking about people's economic woes. And her main campaign this time has been about talking about the economy, about people who feel left out by globalization, by the elites, and therefore a lot of her vote doesn't come from like racist nationalists. Obviously not 40% of the French people is racist or radical, right? It was just the only option against Macron, and therefore, even though definitely her father was a racist and an anti-Semite, she herself is not. And she actually got rid of a lot of toxic people in her party. Obviously, the basis, the ideological basis of her party is radical right-wing. But on the other hand, her main message is to talk about the economy, the people left out or feel left out by the globalization and the elite. And that's why she got 42% of the vote. As I said, you don't have 42% of radical people in France.
Absolutely right. I agree with all of that. But on the other hand, at the end of the day, and I think you hinted at this yourself, Manuel, be that as it may, were she to be elected, she would be elected in the core of her message, again, is that far-right ideology and the cultural far-right message, right? Which, again, was on the back burner of this campaign, and she did a terrific job, especially in the first round, but even in the second, at finding this new message to be able to tap into that alienation and to reach these new constituencies. And again, it shows for those Europeans who want to beat back these movements that as they become more sophisticated, they become more of a threat to those who are in power.
Dr. Navon, we don't have much time left. Some people are saying Marine Le Pen lost and so did Vladimir Putin. Is that fair?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When Macron said to her in that debate a few days ago, to Le Pen, when you talk to Putin, you talk to your banker, he was right. Putin has been promoting all those anti-European, anti-establishment political parties in Europe because he's trying to undermine the European Union and NATO. And definitely Le Pen, who changed her platform, by the way, 5 years ago, she was for quitting the euro, etc., etc. But precisely because of her nationalism, her hostility to the EU, obviously Putin has an interest in those politicians making it in Western Europe. So definitely the fact that she was beaten with such a big margin is another defeat and a welcome defeat for Vladimir Putin.